My name is Matthew Todd, and welcome to Inside the Scale Up. This is the podcast for founders and executives in tech looking to make an impact and learn from their peers within the tech business. We lift the lid on tech businesses, interviewing leaders and following their journey from startup to scale up and beyond, covering everything from developing product market fit, funding and fundraising models to value proposition structure and growth marketing. We learn from their journey so that you can understand how they really work, the failures, the successes, the lessons along the way, so that you can take their learnings and apply them within your own startup or scale up and join the ever-growing list of high-growth UK SaaS businesses. Hey, so good morning, Matt, and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Matt. Nice to see you.
Yeah, two Matts on the call today. So we've got Matt Vamplew, who is the CEO of Paranimo. As always, with the guests on the podcast, I like them to introduce their companies, and we'll start there. So, Matt, tell us, what is Paranimo?
So, Paranimo is a mental health technology company. We're based in Bristol, but we do operate UK-wide. And we work with organisations to better support employees' mental health. So we do that through two ways. One is supporting staff, matching them to the right mental health support. The other way is through helping organisations better manage their cultural well-being. And we do that in a number of ways, using technology and matching to mental health providers to do that. And we work specifically with companies in the software SME space.
Awesome. No, fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll dig into more of the details as to what that exactly looks like in practice and how you got to that point. But I think maybe a good place to start is before Paranimo, what was your background? I think that'd be kind of interesting to hear.
So when I graduated in 2012, I joined a consultancy firm, Cognizant, and I was there working in the emerging technology team. But I was always focused in working on the insurance industry. I then moved into being a management consultant to set up the innovation practice there, again, working with insurance companies, and then moved into a job after as innovation manager in my own right, working for an insurance company to incubate and accelerate new ideas with fintech and insurtech startups. And that was to launch proof of concepts and do lots of different test and learns. And working with startups and seeing how they work was just really exciting for me. And I always wanted to do my own company anyway. And being in the space of innovation has always been really of interest to me. And that was kind of set a great foundation for me to do Paranimo with when I came up with the idea in 2018.
Awesome. And so what was it that led to that idea then?
So in 2018, I went through quite like a rough spot. I was in London and I just thought, I could do with getting access to some therapy. And I went on the NHS and I found it really inaccessible. And it took a long time to find somebody, a 3-month waiting list. I just wasn't prepared to wait. Then I thought, okay, let's look at getting some private support. The thing is, when you do that, you get lost. It's very complicated to find the right support. You go to different directories. When you find a directory, a lot of the mental health providers, whether that's a therapist, a counsellor, a hypnotherapist, say they help you with every different type of problem that you can have. The trouble is, how do you find someone that's relevant to what you need help with? How do you know if you get on with them? And you can't really judge on anything other than, do they tick a couple of boxes? Are they the right price for you? And do they look nice in their profile picture? Yeah. And that complexity I just found just made me feel even more anxious and even more stressed for the very thing I was looking to get help with in the first place. So that's when I thought, hang on, what if there was a platform that could match people to the right mental health support that's right for them, wherever they are? So location was taken out of the equation. Yeah. Apparently it was evolved a lot since that, and we can get into that in the following questions. But really the fundamental was, could there be a way of reducing the complexity and increasing accessibility to the right mental health support for people anywhere in the UK? And that was the premise of the idea.
Yeah, so very much born of personal kind of experiencing the lack of solutions to those kind of problems then.
That's right.
And at what stage did you then decide to make a business out of that? Was it, put everything in and go all in immediately, or was there a bit of a process before you got to that point?
So it was one of those ideas that I couldn't stop thinking about. And I thought, what if there isn't anything else that exists that matches people to the right spot. I couldn't find, and there's always these dating websites that match. There's other ways you can match a different, different support providers in other areas, but there wasn't for mental health. I just couldn't stop thinking about the idea. And I remember speaking in January 2019 to a really well-known angel investor about the idea, and he said it's a great idea. If you really care about it and you can't stop thinking about it, then you should pursue it.
Yeah.
And then I spoke to my co-founder Dan. I said, Dan, do you want to come join? He was doing a PhD in neuroscience at the time, and he went to get some CBT therapy himself. And we thought together, let's do this. And so he was doing this after the end of his PhD. I was still working full time. My last job was innovation manager at DAS, and that was useful for me because I could de-risk, jumping 2 feet in.
Yeah.
But I was able to use my experience of doing proof of concepts, test and learns, with speaking to therapists and people that had support to get both sides of the platform and do that whilst I had my full-time job. And then come to the end of the year, so after we formally founded in May 2019 as a limited company, then at the end of the year, I had the chance to take voluntary redundancy from my company, which was amazing because I thought I want to do this company anyway. And I remember applying for other jobs and thinking, it doesn't feel right. Like I have to do this company. I just can't stop thinking about it. And that's when I said, right, I'm just going to take the redundancy money. I'm going to commit full time to doing it. So very much December 2019 into January 2020, I was doing this full time.
Yeah. And how did you go about then taking that kind of passion for, solving that problem and, identifying a clear need, a gap in the market to validating it, to making sure it was a problem that others experienced, that was one worth solving? I imagine, given your experience, you had a few different approaches, strategies you used. Be good to kind of hear more about what you did.
So one is obviously I knew the problem myself, and that's a great place to start, but it's not the place you end. What you want to do is then talk to people that are representative of the solution and people that experience the problem in the area that you care about. So for me, I've done a lot of customer testing in previous jobs. So for me, it was a case of cold calling. You have to pluck up the courage to cold call therapists who've never spoken before and try and pitch to them the idea and asking if they'd be open to chat. Yeah. And there was always a great guy called Martin. We don't talk as much now, but he was the first therapist that actually came round to my mum's place when Dan came over, and we sat together around the table and I presented a PowerPoint presentation about the concept, and he really, really liked it. And that from there, that gave me the confidence to go talk to more therapists, as well as being introduced to people that I didn't know that had challenges with mental health themselves, and they either got therapy or they had wanted to get it, and asking about their experience of looking and the stresses and how they found and what they'd like to be better. And I always believe in don't fall for the mum effect, which is, if you ask your mum about your idea, they're going to love it because they're your mum, but you want to speak to people that don't know you. They're not your immediate friends. They're like friends of friends is good. People you don't know even better, to get real feedback to the problem. Then you take that feedback, you then iterate on it. You don't have to build a sort of tech solution. You can do a paper prototype, which is what we did. Yeah. And then co-founder Dan was then starting to build more tech, and on the side, and we're just going back and forth, getting user feedback up until the point that we had enough data. And then around that point, I remember we started talking to you. Yeah.
So, I guess on that early journey, obviously you mentioned it's matching clients to therapists or counselors is essentially a marketplace. There are two sides to that. There's the supplier and the consumer. So it sounds like you're saying you started with the supplier, with the therapist first. Is that right?
That's right. So I had to make a judgment call, which is, do you put, and it's a challenge that marketplaces face, I did a lot of research around it as well, is it's which way do you start? Do you get suppliers on first? Then you've got a challenge of incentivizing them to come on first. But then if they're there, then they've got customers to then match to, customers match to them. Or do you get customers on first, incentivize them, and then get suppliers engaged because there's customers there? So it's a bit of a challenge which one you do. I thought it was best that we do supplier first. So we started to get a couple of people interested on that, but I can talk a bit about the grant funding now. Or was that something you'd like to save till later?
No, I think it'd be good to get into the grant funding. I said one kind of question before
Yeah,
we do though. Obviously, the therapists are coming on board. Presumably
yeah.
they're wanting more clients off the back of that. But I can imagine many might have been a little bit fearful if there wasn't a client base already on there, thinking, well, am I going to join and end up losing clients to other therapists and counsellors that are on the platform? Was that an objection you encountered or a fear that they had, or were they
No,
not too
so a
concerned
lot
about
of
that?
the therapists that said, yeah, when you launch this properly, we'll come on board because they like the fact that we took in their feedback to the solution. And one of the things that they face is there's not only the challenge of when you're a customer you're looking for support, you've got the complexity, accessibility challenges, but as a therapist, a phrase I've heard a lot was, I'm a therapist, not a marketer.
Yeah,
Was a big challenge for them. And also they like to work with people that they can help the most. So we started to develop the matching platform that meant that not only could clients get matched to the right therapist, the therapist could then get matched to the right clients.
I see.
And that was something that was really useful to both sides and then the idea that we could also have the platform as a way to, if therapists wanted to come on, they can invite existing clients. And that was a vision that we had after we'd won grant funding. And then we also got into the National Counselling Society, which came at a bit of a later date, but that's related to the grant funding.
Yeah. So going to the grant funding then, we've had other people on the podcast talking about grant funding as well, but how were you able to use that for Paranimo? What was the project? What was the proposition, and how did that work?
So we got sent the grant. So we started working with Business West, fantastic business support organisation in Bristol, but they also work in Southwest as well. And they said, there's a great grant coming out. It's COVID-19 business response. So COVID is well and truly hit by this point. It was sort of March, April sort of time. And it was about March time we got sent the grant. I thought, okay, well, let's apply. So we've got enough feedback from the customer testing. We've got therapists who said that they would get involved. Obviously, we need the funding to build, and funding is always a challenge with a startup. So I spent about two and a half weeks flat out every single day working, just doing the grant. And then we sent that in, and then there was 8,500 applications for 800 places, and we got picked, which is incredible. And I felt like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that we'd actually got chosen. And to get the funding to do that was just incredible. And that enabled us to take from just an idea and a prototype that had been coded by Dan, self-teaching himself.
Yeah.
And obviously we started talking to you around that point, to then having funding to enable the development of a more robust therapist side of the platform, which will enable video support. So it doesn't matter where people are, they can get the right support over video, and the chance for them to invite their existing clients as well, and an administration platform. In terms of the actual project, so the grant funding was to build the foundations of the very platform I was talking about. The idea that therapists have lost a lot of business due to COVID-19, so they needed support accessing clients. A lot of them felt quite worried about the technology side, so giving them a solution that could help them to come on seamlessly to work with their existing clients and get new clients was really attractive. And it was just a good social good cause to do, given the mental health challenge of COVID-19 was pretty big. And that was essentially the basis for the project.
Yeah, so it sounded like that was then a good, obviously COVID being a very negative thing, net negative, but it sounds like actually it really highlighted a need for remote counselling because there wasn't really any other option at that time.
That's right, exactly. And the winning of the grant was a real big stamp of approval. So I then took a punt and I messaged the National Counselling Society. So they're the third biggest mental health association in the UK. So essentially all the different mental health, so it's an unregulated market. So different mental health associations essentially set standards that their members adhere to, and there's different associations. And when I presented Paranimo to them, they thought this is great, a really innovative idea. They've just got grant funding. They want to change the way and increase accessibility and reduce complexity to the right support for people.
Yeah.
We're a big therapist organisation. We will work with you and partner with you and help seed your platform with therapists from our membership base, which was just incredible. And even today, they still are a very good partner of ours.
So it sounds like really, that grant was valuable then, not just in enabling the funding to build the platform, but also, as you say, that stamp of approval that enabled you to forge some very useful partnerships.
Exactly.
So I guess at the end of that kind of process then, and obviously I have some knowledge of this already as well, but it sounds like that kind of gets you to the point of having a platform that's good enough and a platform with enough access to the therapist and counsellor side of that marketplace. And I know the proposition's shifted and we'll get into that, but how did you then approach getting the clients on the platform to match to those therapists?
So I remember speaking to different people through like referrals to try and get them on board and interested. And that was quite a slow process. And I remember at the same time applying for another Innovate UK grant as well. And I thought, I was successful in the first grant, let's apply for this other one. And it was called the Sustainable Innovation Fund. And it was for innovative ideas that were doing economic and social good. And we had funding to do essentially the first part of the platform. So I thought, let's try and get funding for the second part of the platform to build out the matching side, really make it a scalable solution, and get some marketing investment from that to put towards promotional videos and content. And that was pretty cool. So anyway, so I applied and we won that grant as well. So that was £85,000. And the project was about, it was £85,000. That's it. So in total, we got about £150,000 in total to date of grant funding, including an extension to that grant that we won as well. And that essentially gave us the confidence to launch UK-wide with a platform that was built and could then get the PR around it, get people interested to sign up. And we got quite a few sign-ups with that. And during that project, we also did a pilot study. And this is when we started to shift slowly from the B2C market to speak to everybody, get everyone access to the right support, to then move into, through accidental opportunity, into charities. Because the pilot study was with a charity called Care Support Wiltshire. Still a partner with us today. And I got introduced to them through a contact at the outsourced company that we used, Daris, which was fantastic and very, very useful. And they were going to fund support, and we started to tweak the platform in a way that they could essentially fund support for the people that they care about and manage the funding of that through what we call a scheme, mental health therapy scheme. And that was the purpose of the pilot study, was to show the value of our matching, get 3 months worth of data to show any decrease or hopefully decrease in certain mental health indicators like depression, stress, anxiety, and if people found the right match. And the result of that was about 93% of people found the right match. And there's about a 40% decrease roughly for stress, depression, anxiety over 3 months. Now, whilst this is obviously not a proper peer-reviewed study, this is a good indication for us that we're on the right track. And also
great market feedback and case study material, isn't it?
Hugely great. And the ability for us to go, okay, well, we're on the right track. We've got some customers in. We are making some revenue. Now let's put our heads down. When the project ended in April, so that was April 2021, to then think about getting investment and finishing off some of the tech stuff based on some of the feedback that we got, and the new focus on the more B2B angle, working with charities, because we soon learn when you're trying to work with B2C, the general public, marketing budget wins. And when you're a startup, you don't have that ability because it's hard to get known when there's so much noise, as it were. So going on a B2B model where it's one to many, seemed the most logical approach. We started pursuing charities then, and then getting ourselves ready for investment. And of course, we pivoted a bit after that as well.
Yeah, so I guess before we get to that pivot then, from B2C to B2B, you mentioned the kind of the marketing cost. So I guess the cost of acquiring those clients was pretty high if they didn't already, you didn't have that brand awareness and level of trust already established.
Right. Exactly. Cost of acquisition, ads are king when it comes to this sort of thing. You just have to look at other people in the big American competitors that are in the space. It's difficult. Whilst focusing on a B2B angle where you could speak to one charity and they have access to many people and they fund. That's what they do. Fund support. Seemed the best approach for us.
Yeah, and I can imagine that obviously charities are coming, as you said, they're willing to fund the sessions, but also you're getting in front of an audience that has that need at that particular time, whereas reaching people B2C, you don't know whether they actually need support at that time or not.
That's right. Yeah.
So you mentioned kind of another evolution, if you like, or iteration beyond that initial charity kind of customer type. I guess how and why has that changed since then? So
when we started to look for get ourselves investment ready, started to realise that charities, whilst they have a need, which is good, often to work with, they're quite bureaucratic and quite slow, and the pace at which you wanted to grow wasn't matched by the need that they were presenting.
Yeah.
So we thought, okay, well, let's have a look at what else we could be focusing on, and given COVID-19 the huge interest in employee mental health and well-being, and the cost of that is huge for companies like software companies. And we know that the current models of support are unfair in the way that they present themselves. So based on assumed usage of mental health support, such as through employee assistance programs rather than through pay-as-you-go and a more reasonable subscription price to access a platform.
What do you mean by that? So how do those existing programs tend to typically work?
So they tend to work on telephone counselling basis, for example, as well as other types of support that isn't specific to mental health. Could be gift vouchers, could be things like that, all under the umbrella of employee assistance program. They would assume a usage in an organisation is generally about 4 to 6 sessions of support per employee. In reality, usage is not that high. It can be about 5%, 5 to 10% of staff actually uses support. So the organisation is paying for support that isn't being used, and the employee assistance program is incentivized not to encourage too much usage because of the way that they're pricing. So it becomes a bit of an unfair dynamic, really. And we thought this has to be, sure, I think what we do is could be of interest to SMEs, those that have quite a high cost of absence, because when you're a small company, if you've got thousands and thousands of employees, one person taking time off can be absorbed. When you've got 50 employees and 5 take time off, that's 10% of your staff gone. So the absence is quite high, and focusing on tech companies, because salaries are high, therefore absence has a high cost associated with it because salaries are so high. And given a lot of tech revenue, for example, through sales and business development, has a huge opportunity cost of people taking time out if they're stressed and anxious. If they're in sales, that's a lost pipeline, for example. And we thought this was a really good industry to target. And given we are a tech company ourselves, it seemed to align very well. And as we started to evolve our thinking in terms of what we do as a solution, we wanted to move from a more reactive way of doing things. So what I mean by that is we match people to the right support when people know they need support. But we wanted to get more proactive and preventative in terms of people getting to the point where they go, gosh, I could do a talking to someone. I'm feeling stressed and anxious. Could we not find a way to look at how people are behaving in an organizational context within also the context of remote working and the new hybrid way of working, and what that means for culture and what that means for employee mental health? And through that thought process, we then decided that actually targeting software, tech, SMEs, talking to HR and people managers was the best target for us, particularly with our new focus on this more preventative, proactive solution that we call cultural wellbeing.
I see. So it sounds like then certainly very differentiated from that employee assistance program, from those EAPs, which, as you say, you're basically prepaying based on assumed usage that then doesn't turn out to be true, and they're incentivized not to give support. But yeah, so I'm wondering, kind of, could you explain a little bit about the pricing model then that allows you to, not do the same things that the EAPs are doing, but still provide and want to provide support when it's needed, but then also, bring that proactive element you described into it as well. How does that then work from a customer point of view and pricing, business model?
So our two solutions, so we call one personal wellbeing, and the model is still the same. I'll get into cultural wellbeing in a second. But what we do is we do a subscription fee, and then we do a pay-as-you-go usage model for sessions used. And organizations in personal wellbeing can set budgets and usage criteria for their staff. So, for example, it could be, one organization says we're going to have all of our staff get 3 sessions each, and that's 1 session a week or 1 session a month. It's up to them, up to 3 sessions, and our budget will fund up to that point, and that is our ceiling. So it gives organizations the flexibility to have control over their budget, but also knowing that when people need support, that they are going to get matched to the right support. So we've reduced the complexity as we wanted to do, and we've increased accessibility for people that want to get matched to the right support. And the better the match, the better the therapeutic outcome. And I said we've worked that out as relevance to need, personality fit, and availability to see quickly. So that's the personal wellbeing side. Again, very different to the way that employee assistance programs do things, because they price on no pay as you go, assume usage, and they don't do any kind of matching, just on availability, who's next to chat. What's really different.
So they're not solving that original problem that you encountered then of actually wanting to speak to the right person. Exactly.
Now, cultural wellbeing is quite a big step further, which says, okay, what if we could plug into organizations' digital tools, so like Slack, Microsoft Teams, for example, and better understand worker behavior through frequency of messages, times that they're working, when those messages get sent, looking at sentiment rather than content, which is very important to better understand how people are feeling, how teams are working, who's working late. Could that be indications of burnout? And then providing this as a more managed service to organizations, so we can provide an account manager to them to interpret and understand that data, so you get the understand side of things. So that's one part of the solution, the understand part. The other part is support, so matching people to the right support based upon the data and knowledge that they've acquired. So that's very much using a lot of the tools from the personal wellbeing solution anyway.
Yeah.
And then the last part is we measure, so we'll be measuring outcomes of that intervention, but also looking at asking employees how they're feeling alongside what we can observe through the digital tools. It's quite a well-rounded managed service solution that, again, it completely blows out the water the very hands-off employee assistance program solution that is not bespoke or tailored to your organization.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a very differentiated proposition, very proactive. And I know we've, in quite short fashion, kind of talked through the iterations, the pivot points to get there. And I think in explaining it now, talking it through, it sounds very logical, kind of A to B to C to D. This is the learning that led to us doing this. That was the learning that led to us doing that. But as kind of co-founder, CEO, how do you commit to those decisions? Because there's always a different direction you could go at any point. You could always double down on any one of those pivots and decide not to make those changes. How did you find those decisions? Were they easy to make? Were they difficult?
I think definitely speaking to you, speaking to Dan, to get different perspectives is really important. These decisions I don't make in isolation. But then it's also talking to people, like what I've seen, talking to like example customers, understanding what their pain points are, and also in intuition, quite hard to quantify, but it felt like also like the right place to be, the right move, that the answers were there. If I don't feel intuitively like it's the right thing to do, I find it very hard to push through with that decision. So I think that's intuition is very important to me. That's kind of the sum of experience and asking the right questions with the people that you're going to be the solution impacting. So, for example, I spoke to different HR and people managers in our sector to find out what their pain points are. And, you know, with our assumptions, a lot of them being right, some of them being wrong, but more often than not right. That gave me the confidence that actually, this felt like the right thing to do, but also it's logically the right thing for us to do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I guess in terms of, you know, Paranimo then, and the direction and the vision you now see for it, ultimately, kind of where do you see Paranimo ending up?
So we've just recently raised investment from Worth Capital. So that's our first round of private investment, and I'm still actively taking on more angel investment now. So to try and hit our £150,000 target. So now that we've got in that investment, very much there is an exit strategy. So we're looking at 4 to 5 years' time. That's the ambition. So to be acquired by a healthcare or health insurer. So with that in mind, there's a plan to get there. So that involves building up our number of users and people within our beachhead market. So that's the software software SMEs, and then also working out if we can get access to an NHS pilot study. That's going to be very slow, and we've been viewed of clinical interest by the West of England Health Academic Science Network, which are an organisation that sit in between the private sector and the NHS trusts.
Okay.
So that's fantastic for us, and that's going to be a very slow process. It would be a great win for us to use Paranimo as an employee frontline mental health staff support tool. But it's not the be-all and end-all for our exit strategy. So the ambition is to work, once we've got enough credibility through usage, to start working with insurers, so as a proposition enhancement tool. So insurers in the healthcare space, obviously my background's insurance. One of the big things they like now is the idea of insurance as a service. And the big thing of that is, rather than when customers only talk to you as an insurer when they buy insurance and when they claim, there's no relationship built between the two. So the idea now is for insurers to think about how can you build a relationship with your customer whilst also mitigating claims. When you're a health insurer, for example, or a critical illness insurer, or an income protection insurer that's covering things like mental health, time off work, things like that, having a claims prevention tool such as Paranimo as part of the insurance policy, I believe intuition says would be of interest, and it's something I really want to test out. But I've seen it done before with other products, and getting a pilot study with an insurer like that would give us a huge boost towards our goal of being acquired by an insurer, because if they like you, they would rather acquire than build themselves. Because there's a sort of build, partner, acquire model that they have to decide, and more often than not, they will partner and then acquire. And that's the sort of route I can see us taking. But of course, if we can start making traction within the NHS sector, then we open ourselves up even further to healthcare and insurer providers like Bupa, for example, that may be of interest in the future as well. And the plan to get there is really through growing out our beachhead market and then moving into wider areas of mental health need just outside software companies. And as we start to increase our footprint, we get bigger organizations and work towards that 4 to 5 year target.
I see. So it sounds like then there are other products like insurance and healthcare products that those organizations already purchased that don't exactly overlap with obviously what Paranimo is doing, but they're very, very closely related. So actually, it sounds like the combined proposition could be more powerful than each of them individually. Is that kind of what you're saying and where you see it going?
Yeah, exactly. A really good example is in the motor insurance world, the idea of using telematics to track where cars are going was the big thing, and insurers using that data to better understand policyholders' behaviour to then price better. And now a lot of insurers went through a process of buying the very companies that they partnered with to provide that service. So health insurers do the same. So Fitbit is working well with Vitality to use data. So they work very well together. And I see that being a route for us for what we do, particularly for insurers that customers are businesses. So insurers that provide business insurance in the sort of health and income protection and critical illness space.
Yeah, I see. So basically, you mentioned the investment that you've just recently closed, and how are you looking to utilize that investment then, to kind of head on that pathway of that executing that vision? You mentioned, traction, getting more users. Is that the priority now?
Yes, very, very much so. So I've been clear to the investors as well that we have some tidying up of technology to do for our personal wellbeing solution, and flesh out some of some other parts of our cultural wellbeing solution, as well as recruiting a business development manager. We're also going to be looking now that some budget's been freed up, because we're taking more a discrete project-based approach to tech development rather than hiring a full-time developer. So that's freed up budget for us to look at a more as a marketing executive to help us, which is a decision that we decided only recently after getting some advice that it could be a really good support mechanism for the business development manager as well, to kind of tackle both the digital side and the hitting the phones and going to meeting side. I think the combination of the two is going to be really good, particularly in our market, because a lot of them are very digital savvy, and we know that well-being is a huge thing for these companies. So that's really the plan to flesh out over the next 2 to 3 months. So the tech refinements, our cultural wellbeing solution, get the right people on board. Hopefully that won't take more than 2 months, 2-3 months, and then hit the road really. And I'll be going to conferences, I'll be going to different events, and just getting ourselves out there really.
Yeah, I see. So very much you're kind of a key part of that, strategic hiring, but then also that awareness building process itself as well.
Exactly. So I'm very aware that my role is, public facing, trying to raise our profile, bit of HR as well, trying to get the right people, getting investors on board. And it's a very exciting time from where we've come, just from the idea I had from a circumstance I found quite challenging in 2018 to now having a company that's raised money with over £1 million valuation is pretty impressive. And so I'm very excited to see what's next.
No, absolutely. I look forward to seeing what happens next with Paranimo. And I guess just before we kind of round things off, in terms of the topic of employee mental health and well-being, obviously started off as a very personal problem, now deeply involved in supporting other organizations with that as well. And obviously the COVID situation has dramatically changed how people work. Not everyone is in the office, right? It's a very hybrid approach now. Kind of be interested to hear your thoughts on the organizations you've been talking to, the HR professionals you've been talking to. What does that look like, that kind of landscape of employee work and mental well-being?
So one of the big challenges being faced right now is retention of staff and recruitment of staff. So they may seem opposites, but they're very, very, very closely related. So what I mean by that is I spoke to a company recently, and the new way of working has been fantastic in the sense that it's given people more flexibility. What it has done, though, is also increase some isolation and presenteeism, which is defined as essentially continuing to work despite not feeling great because of the longer hours that people are tending to work more because they work from home. And that's causing a lot of stress, a lot of burnout for people. And it's making people think, gosh, is this the sort of job I want to be staying in? How do, and HR managers have a task to try and retain their staff. And that's mental health and well-being is really, really important to do that. And also, how do you manage a culture in a company when everyone's remote? It's not easy. And that's a big challenge that I've seen organizations face as well. And then, of course, you've got recruiting talent. So showing people that working in a company is more than just the money that they're being paid. They're coming to a good culture. They've got some support mechanisms in place, such as employee mental health, and trying to get people to come in with that in mind, is also something when organisations, because of the way that the market's looking, with a lot of London-based firms, for example, using the higher salaries to attract talent that's outside of London, because they're given the remote working way of doing things. It's these sort of things that are able to retain staff rather than just the salary package as well.
I see. So, yeah, people very much looking for and needing support and kind of stability there as well. I guess, do you have any kind of advice for, executives and managers within those organizations to help keep on top of those issues? Obviously, other than checking out Paranimo itself, kind of what advice would you kind of give to those people in those organizations?
I'd say one thing I've seen from things I've read, but also people I've talked to, is HR managers and people managers and executives, but I'll talk about HR and people managers. That's people I've been speaking to mostly. Do have a responsibility for their employees' mental health, and it's not something that they could ignore. By no means am I suggesting that HR and people managers should put themselves out to be therapists for their staff, because that takes specialist training. But having an awareness and not ignoring the problem is extremely important. I'd also be advising these people to look at ways to increase awareness of existing support processes that are in place and policies that are in place in organizations. So, for example, I don't see many companies that have a mental health policy.
Okay.
Yet, I've seen one or two handful of companies that are startups that have these type policies in place. And that's a real signal to your staff that you care. And I think that's really, really important. Just things like that. Now, when people do need help, one of the things that isn't helpful, believe it or not, is to say to your staff, just go to your GP. The reason I say that is, if they're looking for talking therapy specifically, and they say, then your answer is go to your GP. They often face the same challenges I did, of long waiting lists, not being matched to the right support. And it's also what type of organisation you want to be. Are you the type of organisation that looks after your staff? Or are you the type of organisation that chooses to hand off responsibility to others? And I think that's a decision that only the HR and people managers and executives can make. But I hope that there will be one that says they'll take responsibility and look after their staff. And
do you think that with those HR and people managers, whilst that, is obviously the right thing to do, do you see them having a bit of a fear of how to tackle that kind of, sensitive topic of getting involved with other people's mental health, and taking on that responsibility almost?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, opening up and talking yourself is one thing. Knowing how to support someone else is another, because as an HR and people manager, you also got to think of, you've got legal responsibilities, and there's all the complications around that. So being able to rely on a support partner, like Paranimo, for example, that can support your staff, take the burden off you, and support you not only in managing your staff, but creating an environment that is very preventative for mental health issues coming around in the first place, is a good option. And I don't always think that HR managers should put themselves in a position where they are acting like a counsellor or therapist, because they themselves have to look after their own mental health. And that's something that without training can be quite difficult, I believe, for those people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes sense that they themselves shouldn't feel alone in trying to deal with these issues throughout the organisation.
Agreed, exactly.
Perfect. No, I think that's a good place to kind of round off, this conversation. No doubt there'll be other ones in future, but before we let you go, are there any other kind of parting thoughts or comments you want to add?
Yeah, if there's any HR people managers or startups, SMEs that are interested in finding out more about how they can better support their staff and get their culture in a place that is able to support people in the remote working world, definitely reach out. Any investors out there, we are still actively looking to close our £150,000 round. We're almost there, so I'd like to close that off in the next month or so. So anybody listening, that would be a great conversation to have.
Cool, fantastic. Well, good luck with that. I hope that goes well, and thank you for your time again, and we'll speak soon. Nice one. Thanks a lot, Matt. thank you for joining me on this episode of Inside the Scale Up. Remember, for the show notes and in-depth resources from today's guest, you can find these on the website insidethescaleup.com. You can also leave feedback on today's episode, as well as suggest guests and companies you'd like to hear from. Thank you for listening.